Is that going?
Probably not.
Hey, Barry.
Yeah, where was the escape exit here?
There, right, that screen's right behind you. Look at that.
But I was afraid you were gonna make us go that way if it got there.
Well, we had a rocking chair up here where we moved, and we thought that would be a little insulting. So Chris said, let's put Marsh in the rocking chair. Wow, it got quiet all of a sudden, didn't it? Well, I guess we,
Realize all the time.
are you guys ready to get started?
Sure.
Welcome welcome you guys. My name is Greg Johnson. I'm helped out the Woody Fest, and of course have the Blue Door in Oklahoma City. These guys are, well, my longtime friend Dave Marsh and my new friend Daniel Wolff here. Daniel has a brand new book out called Grown Up Anger.
Product placement.
Product placement. And it's of course means a lot to us because it's a wonderful book about music history, cultural history, Woody and Dylan, and the tragedy of the 1913 massacre up in Michigan, of course. So I'm going to have these guys take it away, and we have Michael Fracasso and Chris Buhalis, who are going to be singing some songs for us today. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you. So it's an honor to be here. It's great to be here. It's a double honor to be here with Dave, who had an awful lot to do with how this book turned out, for better, not for worse. The bad parts are mine.
You didn't use everything I suggested.
That's true. It's so true.
And it's a good thing.
Let me start out sort of the way the book starts out, because it'll give you guys an idea of how I got there. And Dave will answer with his own personal reminiscences. I was 13 in the summer of 1965 and pissed off. And people kept asking me what I was angry about, and I'd say just about you name it. And maybe that's typical for a 13-year-old, and maybe it's typical of adults to say, don't worry, I'll outgrow it. Every 13-year-old is angry. But Dave and I were talking on the way here, I think the anger was based on a sense of fairness. And the world didn't look fair to me, didn't look just. And I couldn't believe that adults were just going, yeah, well, that's the way it is. So over the radio comes the voice of this guy who I can't understand the words he's saying, but I go, that guy understands. That guy's telling the truth. And it's like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan on the radio. And I go, okay, there's the truth. And I knew something about him, I think, but I went to try to find out more about him and eventually got to his first record, which had a song called Song to Woody. And I figured out that Woody Guthrie meant a lot to Bob Dylan. So I tried to find out about Woody Guthrie, which we're now talking, as I say, mid-60s. You could do some of, but not too much of. What I could find in the record racks, we remember those, was Arlo Guthrie, because he had records out. And on that Arlo Guthrie record was a song called 1913 Massacre, which struck me immediately because it had the tune of Song to Woody, right? They shared the tune, and I went, aha, this is a clue. And there's some line that runs through all of this, and it has to do with anger, and it has to do with justice and fairness. And I went to try to find out about Calumet, and before Dave talks about his youth, I'm just going to say quickly what Calumet was about. There was a copper strike up there in 1913 that the Western Federation of Miners organized, which was a fairly radical union at the time. Although the Wobblies, the IWW, broke off from them because they weren't quite radical enough for them. And it was a strike to get decent wages, to prevent a one-man drill, which would reduce the workforce. But most of all, it was to get a union recognized. The workers were a lot immigrant, a lot of Finns and Italians just come here, and they had some history of unions or guilds in Europe, and they thought they ought to be represented. And the owners, Calumet and Hecla of the mine, figured, as they had with every strike ever before, that if you waited until winter, these guys would quit, because the Upper Peninsula in Michigan is a little cold, starting in about September till...
I've got photos on my phone of Memorial Day weekend with ice on Lake Superior.
There you go. So they do wait.
About the first time you tried to go up there.
Yeah, right. Well, I couldn't get there because it's just the weather, right?
Well, no, it was more than that. What you told me was that you said to the sheriff, could I come up and see this? And he said, well, not right now, and you said, why not? And he said, because there's 10 feet of snow in front of
Yeah,
it.
right.
And that was Thanksgiving.
So if the company could wait till that, they could wait out the strike. And that's, I think, enough about the beginning of that. All of this was a little theoretical to me. I'd never been to Calumet, I've been to Michigan, but Dave, on the other hand, grew up in Michigan. So I'm handing the baton over to you.
Well, Daniel and I grew up, Daniel's not my best friend, I don't know who he is, but I'd like to meet him. If it's better than this, I don't know. But I come from, Daniel has a thing in the book real early about it. He talks about, we grew up in a certain description of fathers who went and commuted into the big city every day and houses with basketball hoops on them. And I thought that's really funny because my father was the conductor on the train that took him to work every day. And when my father finally put up a garage, we had the only basketball hoop on a garage in the entire neighborhood. I mean, kids flocked from all over town. And so that's just like, that's a class difference, right? And there's a class difference between Woody and Bob. But that's not the real difference that Daniel grabs out of this thing. The real difference is a contrast in outlook and a contrast in sensibility that's defined by where your circumstances. And for me, the way he puts it, what I finally decided was, well, it's about loneliness, which is sort of mostly Bob, although they both move along the scale, of course. And then community at the distant end, which is, that's what Woody was all about, right? But Woody's loneliness is, you can taste it in everything he did. And you know, if you've ever been in an empty boxcar, you know, that's like, I don't care how many people were in it, it's the loneliest place you could imagine. So it's not like, I'm not trying to set them up as opposites, I'm trying to figure out how, and that's what the book's about. The book's about how do all these different people fit inside that one question that animates like Rolling Stone, right? Which is, how does it feel? And it's funny that you could change the world with that, because everybody wants to make it more concrete, but I don't think it necessarily is. So I grew up, my granddad worked on a railroad, but he grew up at the other end of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. His father was a lumberman. And they got down to the Detroit area because actually my great-grandfather cut his leg off. And if my grandfather, who was 14 then, had not tied a tourniquet, he'd have died. So that's, and I don't know if there was a lumberjack union, was there?
Not that I ever heard of.
No, that's not the story of Paul Bunyan. But so my granddad had a perspective on things, and my dad, he worked on a railroad too, but my grandfather was a switchman. But they sort of came at things from a very different angle. My father grew up on a farm. Actually, he grew up on a farm where, in the town where the Oklahoma City bombing was planned. And a lot of those assholes are my cousins, I can't deny it. And my parents were Wallace voters. And I asked my mom one time, it's probably in my 20s, what was politics like? And she said, well, about like yours. And I went, she said, no, really. And then I remembered that when I was a little boy, I was helping my grandfather make a cabin up in he and my grandmother had a place in the upper, in the Pinewood Forest, just below Mackinac, Straits of Mackinac. And I was helping them do this thing. I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. And so at some point I escaped that and started walking down this long road that was kind of like their driveway. And this man comes along. He's taller than my grandfather, but he's got he's got the same white hair, and he has that look in his eyes. And he stops me and he said, "My name is Elgin. What is your name?" And I told him who I was. And he says, "Well, is your granddad here?" And I said, "Well, yes, he is." And so I took him to my grandfather. And then I went and I saw my grandmother, and I said, "You know, this man named Elgin is with," and she literally dropped whatever it was she had in her hands. And her eyes got real big like this and said, "They haven't talked to each other." How long would it have been? In 40 years. Because in 1918, there was a railroad strike, a very important railroad strike. It was sort of a prelude to everything that went on in 1918 and 1990 as they set up the parts of the police state that we now live in. And, you know, the Palmer raids and all that came out of that. And the railroad strike was the spark on both ends, sort of, that in opposition to World War I, to America entering World War I. So, and my Uncle Elgin's scabbed on the strike. So my grandfather got a boxcar. He painted on the side of it. Remember, there's no spray paint, so he had to be using, like, you know, a brush and paint. Elgin Ebon is a scab. And he got behind the boxcar and he'd give it a shove so it would go down through the yard and everybody would see it. And then they didn't talk to each other for 40 years. And that, to me, is sort of also like Daniel's book. That people were doing very small things that emerged into very big things that they didn't necessarily have control of, but wanted control of. People felt very isolated, which I think applies to probably both my great uncle and my grandfather. And people were fighting, this is a big Dylan thing, is that people are fighting, they don't know what they're fighting for. You know, Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, what the hell are they fighting about in the captain's tower? I don't know. You know, he doesn't try to tell us, so probably he doesn't know. And if they actually had that fight, and I suppose in some metaphoric sense they did, they knew more than we did, but it wasn't that much. And so, and I think that's really important to understanding both Dylan, because people are always searching for meaning. And really, if you just listen to it, it'll come to you. That's what you're saying about like a Rolling Stone in particular. But that's true right down to now. And with Woody, people are always trying to make everything a big stick. And what I learned when Harold Leventhal and I edited what I think of as the first edition of Woody's papers, it was all we had then. It was 2 cardboard boxes and that handwritten original version of This Land Is Your Land. And we started by me saying to Harold, "You got a safe in here?" in his office in Manhattan. He said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm not leaving till you put that piece of paper." That's the one that Nora almost lost in the fax machine a few minutes ago, or the copying machine. But anyway, you know, but it was a lot of small stuff.
So I think that era, part of what Dave's saying, I think that's right. That era was a primal fight in American labor history, what's called the progressive era. And it inspired Woody. He looked back, the way Dylan looked back to Woody, Woody looked back to that era. And he wrote this song, which I hope Michael will play now, 1913 Next.
Okay. All right.
An abrupt intro, but we got to
Yeah. This song always gets me because as a kid, my dad worked in the steel mills in Ohio, and at Christmas time, they would have a big Christmas ball, and all the kids, and just like in the story, and it was one of my favorite things because they gave you a bag of candy and with maybe a toy in it or something like that, but we were, you know, just poor kids, you know, it was great.
Take
take a trip with me to 1913. Calumet, Michigan, in the copper country. I'll take you to a place called Italian Hall, where the miners are having a big Christmas ball. I'll take you through a door and up a high stairs, where laughing and singing can be heard everywhere. I'll let you shake hands with the people you see, and watch kids dance round the big
to say that when I got a little older, my parents used to go, my dad was a big fisherman, not with a lot of luck, but he wanted to fish for lake trout, which are few and hard to catch, and their Jerusalem is Lake Spirit. And so they started going up there, they had some friends up there, and I can remember standing, that's pretty much what Daniel describes at the mouth of the mine. This would have been about 1964. And there was no sense, wasn't a plaque up or anything. People told me that this was this mine, and that this was the mine that enriched the place and created the place, really. But we weren't, I didn't even know Calumet, because we were staying nearby in Hibbing or Houghton or both. And of course, closer to the water. But anyway, but I can remember, Daniel and I were talking yesterday, I can remember picking copper up off the ground. It was still there. It was an amazement. But when I heard the song for the first time, which was, I guess, Woody's version, it seemed like a magician's trick to get that. I mean, it's a long song. I don't know how the hell you memorize it.
The words don't change.
Well, why should they? The words don't.
Just gotta learn them once.
Easy for you to listen.
So it is, I agree with David, it's a magician's trick. I mean, part of, as I kept listening to that song, part of what goes on, first of all, the whole first part of it is, won't you come in? It's all personal and present tense. Come on to this party. And there, you know, there's no history involved. We're all going into this party. And then it turns dark and goes into the past tense. He never mentions the strike. He says they're copper boss thugs, and he says they aren't getting paid well, but he doesn't talk about the strike. For me, it ended up being, he talks about it as if when people get together in a community and try to do something together, there are always shits at the door. There's always someone ready to break it up, right? And that's the description to me in this song. And then it ends with that one line, see what your greed for money has done. You know, it blew my mind more, you singing it, but it all was just, I can't believe that we've gotten there from the beginning of the song. It is a masterpiece, I think, of songwriting. And the kid from Hibbing, Minnesota, formerly known as Robert Zimmerman, clearly heard it the same way. You gotta understand, Woody Guthrie was one when the Calumet disaster happened. He wasn't there. He didn't invite anybody in. He read it from Mother Brewer's book, who was one of the organizers of the Communist Party. He read it as history and he turned it into song. And Dylan, when he gets to New York, you know the basic story. He fell in love with Woody Guthrie. There are pictures of him smoking a cigarette like Woody Guthrie, holding the guitar the same way. He goes to see him and writes postcards home. I talked to a guy on the radio the other day who was a friend of Dylan's, he said, in Minnesota, and got one of the postcards, said, Woody likes my stuff. God damn, Bob. Okay. He was totally knocked out by him, and he decided to write a song, his first song, what he called his first, legitimate, serious song, called Song to Woody, and Chris is gonna do it.
You guys need to read the book. I grew up in Detroit with, my dad was an iron worker, and I have similar memories like Michael was talking about. We always went to they always had the big Christmas party, and we got a big stocking full of like candy and stuff. And, so this song Woody was. I'm out here 1,000 miles from my home, walking a road many men have gone down, seeing your world of people and things, your paupers and peasants and princes and kings. Hey, Woody Guthrie, I wrote you a song about a funny old world that's coming along. It's sick and it's tired, it's hungry, it's torn. And it seems like it's dying, but it's hardly been born. Well, hey, Woody Guthrie, I know that you know all the things I'm saying and many times more. Well, I sing you the song, but I can't sing enough, 'cause there's not many men who've done the things that you've done. Here's to Cisco and Sonny and Leadbelly too, and all the good people who traveled with you. Here's to the hearts and the hands of the men who come with the dust and are gone with the wind. Well, I'm leaving tomorrow, I could leave today. Somewhere down that road someday. Very last thing that I'd like to do is to say I've been hitting some hard travel too.
Yeah.
So not only does he grab the melody, right, but it's a song of comparison. It's like, here's what Woody Guthrie did, here's what I've done, I haven't done nothing, essentially. He's 19 still.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What is that last line?
The very last thing that I'd like to,
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
always
does he want to
started
do it
as-
or not do it?
Yeah, I can't figure out whether he's saying, it's the last thing I want to do is compare myself. Or is he
Yeah.
saying, the last thing I do before the song is,
yeah, I always took it that, I mean, this is a guy who was a congenital exaggerator, to be nice. And had come to New York saying, I lived in the circus, I've traveled all over, I've hopped freight. He was from a middle-class family in Giving, guy ran an electrical company, right? And had been at university for a year. The quote I found from his father in the local paper was, he said he wanted to go to New York to be a folk singer. We gave him a year. If it didn't work, he had to be back in college. That's the side of Bob Dylan you don't hear too much about. So, I think it's the beginning. I think why he thinks it's a substantial song, among other things, is it's him saying, I ain't all that stuff. I'm going to have to do something different. Because for one thing, the times have changed, and I haven't lived that life. It's not only not 1913, it's not 1935. There's a different world out there. And it begins, right, with a funny old world that he says is dying while it's being born. You talk about loneliness, that's a very lonely song
Oh, yeah.
to me, right?
yeah. Well,
Go ahead.
what he's trying to get past is the fact, that he stole all those first Woody Guthrie records. From John Pancake, who nearly beamed him for
Yeah.
And he probably stole the Mother Glory book too.
There you go.
He was not just a kid who was flummoxed about what to do. He was a kid who was as scared as any kid who's 18 and trying to change the world. His, even if it's only his, he was more ambitious than that. And at the same time, he was this rapscallion and this kind of, pickpocket type. He was like out of Dickens.
Yeah, and a comedian.
Oh yeah, the first time I heard Bob Dylan, I was standing in the hallway at my high school and a guy who was 2 years older than me, meaning he was maybe 17, holds up the cover of Free Will and Bob Dylan and says, "Have you heard this cat?" Because he knows I'm like music obsessed. I said, "No." He said, "He's the funniest guy I have ever heard in my life." And if you know Free Will is funny as hell out. It really is. I mean, a lot of those songs, Talking World War III Blues shouldn't be funny, but it's hilarious.
So let me read.
I was gonna play it so you can sing it.
Let me read some of what Dylan wrote after meeting Guthrie. He says, Woody Guthrie was my last idol. He was the last idol because he was the first idol I'd ever met face to face that taught me that men are men, shattering even himself as an idol. And then, this is me talking, it was as if he'd finally made his way to the mythical realm, only to discover it wasn't the truth, it was myth. And it wasn't only his idol that shattered. In the same poem, Dylan writes how he came to New York to find the union halls and meeting places of the this is Dylan again, hungry 30s, but they're changed, they've been remodeled. Where are those forces of yesteryear? Where is our party? Where all members held equal and vowed to infiltrate that thought among the people it hopes to serve, and sets a respected road for all those like me who cry, I am ragingly against absolutely everything that wants to force nature to be unnatural. So, to me, part of what Dylan is saying is not only is Guthrie a sick guy and not who I thought he was, but the world is gone and the movement is gone. And when
He omits the fact that there was not only a mine workers union, but it was based in Hibbing.
right, he didn't talk about that much. But
I suspect he couldn't find it.
yeah, when Dave says the Palmer raids, there were the Palmer raids, and then Dylan comes in after the McCarthyism, right? So Dave can talk about this better than I about how effectively the organized left got dismantled and dismembered.
Well, the job wasn't done until that great wave of accidents and assassinations we call the 60s. But, and that really was what it was like for people who believed in that kind of change in the United States. And it's a good thing we're here today because it might be that again, as something like that kind of opposition is maybe forming. And I think, but I didn't see that. My father was a union steward after a while. I didn't see the connection to that. I knew labor unions were connected to politics, and I knew that our lives were a lot better because the UAW and the Trade Workers Union too, I guess. That was really kind of a white supremacy front. But it wasn't where the heart and the minds of the men counted for much. You get bossed around by Walter Reuther. Well, Walter Reuther was a great man. You're still getting bossed around. And I think that was the change that made things look like they were dying. And other things that had once started to emerge looked like they were never born.
Right. So, in a sense, both these guys, I think, came along at a time when it looked like they couldn't organize anything. A time that may be very familiar to you, when it felt like you couldn't make any of these changes. Certainly, Dylan, by 1960, 1961, was a kid. So he writes a dialogue at this point. Somebody asks him about the Communist Party. He goes, "What Communist Party?" And the Communist Party was a real thing 30 years before. And part of what inspired it again was the progressive era, the era before. Dylan says he came to New York and somebody, wait, let me back up a second. When Woody Guthrie came to New York, they said, "You're the communist Joe Hill." And he went, great. He knew who Joe Hill was, songwriter, he knew the stuff. When Dylan came, they said, "You're like Joe Hill." And Dylan claims and chronicles, "I never heard of Joe Hill. I didn't know anything about it."
It's not hard to believe.
From Hibbing?
Yeah, I don't think. You think that people taught you? He did his work in Utah. You know how far that is?
I know, but among other things, there's this song, which Chris is going to play, which was, on the left anyway, a big song. He said it never heard. It never heard this song, which may well be. Joan Baez ends up singing it at Woodstock later on.
Woodstock's a lot later than he was asked that question.
Exactly. So there's this song, and when he did hear it, he thought about writing a song to Joe Hill, because he said, Dylan says, "I could do better than this." Right? Instead, he says, again in Chronicles, "I wrote a song to Woody. I decided I'd do a song to somebody else I really admire."
But there's one more thing though about what you just said, because when people were discussing the Communist Party to Woody, they were doing something that was going on all over the city they were in the state, and the country,
Right.
and it was legal. When Bob was asked that question, it wasn't legal, it had been destroyed, it was not going to rebuild itself, it was going to have to be a new version of whatever that People's Victory means.
Right.
And that is accounted for best by Bob's music.
Right.
But, you know, there are all sorts of reasons he had to adopt some of those pretenses.
Yep. Can we hear
Yeah,
it?
yeah. This is a poem that Alfred Hayes wrote, and then it was put to music by a guy named Earl Robinson. I think I don't know, to me this one always shows kind of, it's like a demonstration of kind of how this model doesn't work, the martyrdom, to a degree. I mean, this is like an example of before Bob Dylan, like what would be considered inspiring to a union movement, and you know, it's based on like the talismans of the martyrs, like we talk about, like in the 1913 massacre. Read the book. I'm gonna go on. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead, and I never died, said he. I never died, said he. In Salt Lake City, I said to him standing by my bed, well, they framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. Well, the copper bosses, they shot you, Joe. Well, they killed you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. Him standing there, just as big as life, with a smile in his eyes. He said what they forgot to kill just went on to organize. It went on to organize. Well, Joe Hill ain't dead, he said to me. Joe Hill ain't never died. Well, when working men are out on strike, Joe Hill is by their side. Well, Joe Hill is by their side. Well, from San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers strike and organize, it's there you'll find Joe Hill. Oh, it's there you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. It's ridiculous optimism in a way. I mean, it's a great song, and I know but it always struck me when I heard it, you know, that, you know, it's like, wow, he didn't die. He was shot by a firing squad. He's pretty dead. And I know it's, you know, metaphorical, but it always struck me as somehow.
Well, no, it's musical too.
Yeah. That's true.
I mean, you're only about 3 chords from putting Jimmy LaFave
Oh, we're not even.
in the room.
No, Jimmy LaFave's in the room. Yeah.
He likes
True.
That's my point, you know, as somebody, a friend of ours said, you know, I don't want to live in a world without Chuck Berry. I said, well, geez, what, you know, there's no chance of that. Not anymore. And that's I was thinking about that as you sang the song today. I never really heard Joe Hill that way. You know, the song, that of understanding that there are people who that'll happen to in any person's lifetime. And it isn't because Joe Hill was a hero, although he was a hero. It's because what is it? Martin Luther King said that the problem with communism was that it forgot that life is individual. And that the problem shouldn't have brought Jimmy up. But the problem with capitalism is it forgets that life is collective.
Yeah.
And everything, and it was a great book, and everything my brothers have been singing today, and everything this festival is about, that's what it says.
Yeah, and I think that, like, the reason Joe Hill's a hero to me is because he did the small acts that we talk about, that we look at now as these grand acts, but Joe Hill was fighting, he was like in an everyday existence at that point, writing these songs for the moment, because they needed to be sung, and they were powerful, and he did have intent, I'm sure, but they weren't, you know, they were immediate. You know, the intent was immediate. We're
Direct
gonna
action,
sing, you know,
yeah.
when the Salvation Army guys get here and start their bullshit with their horns, we got a song we can sing with them now.
Well,
Right.
and not only that, Earl Robinson, what happens to him after the McCarthyism? He becomes a guitar teacher.
Mhm.
Who's he teach? John Landau. Which will mean something to some of you.
Is that right?
And the circle
It's
is,
absolutely
and the
right.
circle is unbroken.
That's amazing.
You know, the quote I used at the beginning of this book is from John Berger, who's a great writer if you haven't read him. How do the living live with the dead? And for me, that's a bunch of what that song's about, or anybody else who's died who we care about, is how do we continue to live with them? How do we do that? How do we honor them? How does this, what I call line of anger, that goes back in time, continue? And it was never easy, as you say. Joe Hill didn't have an easy route, and neither did Woody Guthrie or a whole bunch of other people.
Not what I got so weak about is the fact that it's up to us.
Yeah. So Dylan answered that song too, and Michael's going to play what I think is the answer to it, and we can talk about that a little bit. And I want to have time for questions and stuff.
I dreamed I saw St. Augustine, alive as he wore me, tearing through these quarters in utmost misery, with a blanket underneath his arms and a coat of solid gold, searching for the very soul you have already been sold.
that song, to me, starts to explain itself in ways it never had when you put it, first of all, when it's sung by Michael, but also when you put it in this context, right?
I don't think I understood.
I never understood that song. I was always fascinated by it, like completely. And I always understood that first line to be from Joe Hill
Right,
too.
right.
But after that, the whole song.
Does it make
just-
any more sense now, or is it just me
Yeah, it
deluding
makes
myself?
more sense now, yes. Yeah,
Yeah, you know, there's no martyr amongst you now. You know, you don't have Joe Hill. You don't have that inspiration, but know you're not alone. And that's what Dave was just saying, you know? And in hard times, like I think we're presently in, where you think there's no inspiration, there's no connection to the past, there are these connections. There are the dead we're living with, right? And there's a certain way to honor them and to move forward.
And all times are hard times.
And all times are hard times. Yeah, right, whether you're Woody Guthrie or Bob Dylan. Yeah, we should do some questions.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for coming out, and a reminder that these guys are going to be at the Full Circle Bookstore Saturday in Oakland City at 2 o'clock. There's no books here, so go to Oakland City, get them in Tulsa. Even the evil Amazon, I guess, has them. Anyway, there's none here, but anyway, so let's open up for questions. I want to thank these guys for
I think
coming
what
down.
Greg meant to say, didn't you mean to say I'm playing at 3 on Saturday?
You can drive pretty quickly.
You didn't get the email. did you?
Anyway, so let's open it up for a few questions. We got about 10 minutes or so.
Yep.
To comment, we're going to add your book to our woodyguthrie.org store, so
That's good to see.
starting on Monday, you can get it there as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Very.
It's cheaper on Amazon.
That's why nobody likes you, Alice.
Alice Paul is supposed to be secured.
Did you have a question?
I read the book last week, and I just want to thank you for pulling a lot of loose threads together in my mind about the topic.
Good, thanks.
It's one of those hard tales to tell, because there's so many moving parts to the story, but I really liked the way you did it, and
I said to Bill, who's sitting behind you, he said, I asked you a couple years ago when you were working on it, why didn't you explain you were working on this? I said, I had so many balls in the air to write this book, I wasn't convinced it was gonna work
Yeah.
until I was done, essentially, because of that, trying to pull all this stuff together.
you did it.
Well, thanks. But that's not a question. Not a question.
How'd you do it?
Over a lot of time.
You just told me.
Right.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if you're aware, but there was a documentary made a few years ago about the 1913 massacre. I don't remember where I found it at, you know.
It's,
some
it's,
obscure
it's
source.
good too.
It's wonderful,
Yeah, yeah, it's real good.
Do they get the stairs right?
Yeah, they fight
The
back and forth,
documentary?
they fight back and forth about the stairs. The
That's
stairs,
the only way to get it right.
yeah, so that you guys understand, what Woody says in the song was the thugs held the door, was the strikers' position. The town's position was, and I've never quite understood the
Yeah.
logistics here, that the doors open in, therefore they couldn't have held them,
Yeah.
or something.
No, so they were saying that, so when people got to the stairs, they were there,
Yeah, no one held
they
it.
couldn't open the door and with the crush. But the problem was that it just,
Well, there were blueprints saying the doors opened out, but mostly the business about it opening in was a way of saying this is nobody's fault. This whole thing is neutral, and we can all make, you know when people say, let's bring closure to this? Yeah, well, fuck
let's
closure.
make it right.
That's the reason.
Let's bring justice to
One of my dad's best friends was at home when I was telling him, this is years ago, and was talking about this. And he made that, I don't know if it made your trip.
No, I made my trip, I couldn't make the trip.
Like when we studied making the trip, and Jim was sitting there, he's one of my dad's best friends, but my dad was long gone. And he grew up in Hibbing, Michigan.
Oh.
And he said, don't believe that version of the story, that's not the true version of the story. I said, gee, Jim, how do you know? He said, my grandfather was, ran that.
Ran
Ran
that
the line?
Yeah. I told you that.
I don't know that, no.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was more like a.
He ran the mine.
He was like a.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he was like a big league functionary, you know, he didn't actually own the product of it.
The town of Calumet still doesn't like Woody Guthrie very much.
No, they still.
Right?
Oh, they
It's,
still, when I've been up there, they still kinda oh, that damn song, you're talking about that damn song, I don't know why you wrote that damn song. Well,
I
that's
understand
because a
that
bunch of
people in
kids died.
Okima used to say similar things about Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
Someone got booed at the old folks home yesterday because she said she's gonna sing a Woody Guthrie song, and some guy said, boo!
And they kicked him out of his own nursing
They got
home.
kicked out, he got kicked out.
Didn't they leave that up as like a memorial though? That
Yeah.
stick
They have
stairs
the
and the
arch,
door?
the arch is there.
Yeah, they tore the building down, but they kept the archway and had a plaque there.
Right, okay.
Here's a picture of the
Oh,
door.
great. Yeah, you got a question. Yeah, there you go. There's
And
the door.
at the time,
Thanks for the
opening
phone.
out.
Yeah.
That's great.
When did your book come out,
Thank
and has Mr. Dillon or anyone commented?
It came out a month ago. Mr. Dillon has not commented, and I didn't try to talk to him about it. Because, you know, it's about him, but what he could have added was probably his reactions to Woody. But that was more interesting to me than his reactions to himself. But I couldn't get to him. I mean, I didn't try to get to
I
him.
understand that part.
And the second part was, has anybody else commented? Yes, lots of other people have commented one way or another.
Well, it's his song.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah. No, do you have another question? We good?
More questions, you guys?
I want to thank Michael and Chris a lot for doing this, and thank you all for coming.